good morning, everybody. I think I'd just like to start off by having everyone go down and introduce themselves and just say their title and just one sentence about what they do. So Kevin, we'll start with you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Kevin Virgil. I'm the Chief Investment Officer at Meta Impact Capital. We're an early-stage venture fund that invests in companies that are creating Metaverse content and Web3 content and building infrastructure.
All right, and hi, I'm Lisa. I'm the CEO of Economics Design, and we build the economic models of the future.
Hey everyone, I'm Miles, CEO of Decentral Games. We build Metaverse poker.
Sweet and to the point. Okay, so to start us off, on the subject of the Metaverse, it has been a big year for the subject of the Metaverse. Basically the first year that the term itself has kind of entered the popular consciousness. I mean, it's been on the cover of Time Magazine, New York Times. It's been pretty much everywhere, so huge in that sense. Tens of billions of dollars in the last year have flowed in from decentralized companies, also centralized companies like Meta, formerly Facebook in particular. There have also been some failures as well, specifically on the subject of play-to-earn games. Axie Infinity in the last year was a huge, very promising model for play-to-earn, and then it didn't go so well after a few months. So Lisa, to start with you and your perspective as a researcher, what do you think of the last year have been the biggest lessons about paths forward for economic models with the Metaverse and also kind of warning signs or what not to do?
Very great question, because that's exactly all the clients that we've been working with in the last 6 months and building the economies for these different things. And I think when we take a step back to look at what Metaverse is, we can look at Metaverse in two key categories. One is games as different universe, and one is Metaverse as in a universe where people all come together. The biggest differentiating factor is that with games, there is a very specific gameplay, which are economic transactions that we want economic agents to engage in. Whereas with Metaverse, it could be just a universe, and you have sub-universes and sub-economic behavioral interactions that we want them to have. So given these two different kind of categories, the way you design economy is very different. And the way you design economy is very dependent on what your economic agent is, what your market is about. So with metaverses, the key important thing to remember is that you're interacting with a lot of either cross-metaverses and import. So you have to think of import-export and how does that inflationary or FX, foreign exchange, impact your current sustainability of economy. Or when you look at games, this is a very specific interaction that you want to enhance. You want to make sure it's self-sustaining, it's self-financing, it's self-organizing. And how do you build the right kind of economy to help facilitate that? And I think a lot of people forget about the economic side of things, because metaverses, games, these are just like countries. And you have to build the right kind of rules to allow interactions to happen. It's not something that you just put it out there and say that, okay, this is a metaverse. You guys can do anything that you want. Sure, you can do anything you want, but you need to incentivize certain kind of activities. That's why people go to the country. That's why people go to your metaverse. If there is no specific objective or value that you're creating in your metaverse or GameFi or anything, then nobody will come to your ecosystem, and then you can design the best economic model. No one is just going to use it. Gotcha.
Miles, your perspective as someone, CEO of Decentral Games, you're currently building and running one of these play and earn platforms. What has the last year shown you about the lessons of how, like Lisa was saying, you incentivize people to not just come, but stay and participate in these games? And how have you thought about creating a sustainable economic model for what you're creating?
Yeah, definitely. So I think we all saw in 2021 the kind of boom of this play and earn model that mainly was just trying to incentivize people to participate and just be active in these games. And we saw that it was very effective in doing so. Certain games grew to several million daily active users, which is a very large amount of users considering Web3 numbers. But I think a lot of these models were flawed. We actually launched a game inspired by this model last October. They're built on growth, and they're highly inflationary, and so they are effective at bringing in a lot of people in. But as you said, once the growth stops, once the market sentiment turns a little more bearish, people are able to exit and kind of extract value from the ecosystem. And so going into what Lisa was saying, this is not good if you're looking at the ecosystem kind of like a country. Capital flight is not great, and we've kind of seen that in the macro recently in certain countries. And so going into this year, we saw this massive growth, kind of like a boom and then a bust cycle. And so in our game, it's just a simple poker game. We kind of tried to redesign a new game mode that's more deflationary. And I think that's actually really important. I do think if we would have launched with this, we would have been in a much better scenario today. But it was effective in bringing in users. But now, I think it's all about balancing that in-game economy with all the tokens that are circulating. And in terms of Metaverse, I think it's really important to leverage the social aspects of Metaverse. And I think going into what Sandra was mentioning earlier about what gets people to stay, what makes it sticky. And for us, we found that as people play the game and kind of earn more rare items and earn tokens, the reason why they stay instead of just extracting value is kind of the social interactions that they're making within the game economy and within the community. And so without that, I think it's easier for people to just kind of exit and sell their assets. But we found that by hosting events in the Metaverse, having poker nights, certain types of incentives to keep people to stay and keep coming back every day, we found that the product is much more sticky due to the social aspects. And that's only possible because we're kind of in this 3D virtual environment.
I've never heard that before, but I like that, sticky. But in terms of making something sticky or getting people actively involved and creating an ecosystem, a community, Kevin wanted to ask you this, and this is zooming out, a little broader. Like I mentioned earlier, the metaverse and a lot of when people think about it, and I want to know when people invest in it, there's kind of this promise that 5 years out or 10 years out, we're all going to be using it. People are saying, and I don't know how lofty it is, that our social lives, our entertainment, our culture will be on the metaverse. It's for everyone, not just people who are attending conferences like this. So in terms of the whole proposition value of this type of stuff being dependent on creating these communities, when you're looking at investing in metaverse projects, is it important the distinction for how broad is the reach of this? Or, is this a project that is really already for people who are already involved in Web3 versus is this kind of a universal product that could become, as universal as, social networking is now, for example?
Yeah, sure. I think that's for our process, and you mentioned going up to that 30,000-foot view, and I think you have to make some philosophical judgments on what you believe the metaverse to be. And right now, there's a big debate on whether the Web 2 vision of what Facebook/Meta is trying to accomplish, where they have this this walled garden where most of the profits accrue to them, and they have control over who can use the platform. Or do you ascribe to more of a decentralized, somewhat messier vision of the metaverse, where anybody can participate, users create content, not centralized platforms, and the economics accrue more favorably to them? My team, we ascribe more to that latter vision, and we want to participate in the growth of a more decentralized internet or metaverse. And if you make that decision, then you have to look at what are the economics of a particular game or a platform? I think for us, there are two primary drivers of what the metaverse is ultimately going to become. And those are gaming, because games or successful games ultimately bring millions or tens of millions of users to the metaverse. And then crypto is the second driver, because those are the payment rails that enable peer-to-peer payments and remove the need for those massive centralized platforms to govern the whole thing. So then if we're looking at games, look, ultimately, I think the successful games, and I think this is why a lot of these play-to-earn games have stumbled over the past year, and that's okay because we're still very early in the process, but they're just not that much fun. People weren't playing Axie over the past year. Like that guy who was driving a truck outside of Manila wasn't playing Axie because he thought the game was fun. He was playing 12 hours a day because he wanted to feed his family, and he thought he could make more money playing that game. And now the problem with that is, and this has been a problem with a lot of other Web3 projects. I mean, I'm a big fan of Helium, which is outside the scope of what we're talking about. But that's a very successful Web3 project that's run into trouble because they paid out rewards faster than they were onboarding new users and creating demand for the product. So now we've got this issue where rewards have dropped to the floor and the demand for the token has fallen. And I think this is what happened to a lot of the play-to-earn games. So I think in order for play-to-earn to work, I think you're ultimately going to have to see the big gaming studios get involved and bring the resources to build something that's really fun, right? Like a GTA 6 or something along those lines. And it will happen. It's just not going to happen overnight.
I'm going to add the point to that.
Yeah, go for it.
I was at, because we do a lot of games and we design a lot of games, and we talk with our team many times, like, can we take a Web 2 game designed by all these big studios and just turn it Web 3? You know, can we take GTA? Can we take EVE Online? Can we take any of these big games out there to make it Web 3? And you just slap a token on it and build that. So let's take EVE Online, for example. Any one of you know what EVE Online is? Great, okay, some people. So this is like one of the biggest, most successful, most complex Web 2 game out there. And it's building ships and going on battles. That's a very, very, very simplified version. You have a lot of different layers to complete. And so this is a very complex game. And we were thinking, okay, what if we just NFT the ship? And we allow a marketplace to exist to do that, because you don't really have that in the world. You do have black markets to do that. You can go and rob ships. But you can't exactly do that, because one of the biggest difference with Web 2 games and Web 3 games is that Web 3 games allow us to build a bridge with the physical world that we're in right now. And what does that mean? What is the key considering factor when we are designing economics? It's not just the social, it's not just the financial economics and monetary economics, but how does the entire system interact? In the physical world today, it's extremely, extremely, extremely complex. When you want to build a ship, it's not just going to the shop and buy. You need to find ways to get money. The ship company needs to find ways to get metals, to get all these different things to build the ship. So to bridge between these two different worlds, the Web 3 games has to be extremely complex as well to allow that bridge to exist. Otherwise, you have arbitrage. You have arbitrage in time spent in Web 2 game or this Web 3 game, and turn them into value or tokens. It can be extracted and brought to this physical world, where it's a lot more complex to achieve that amount of money. So play to earn is something that I think is going to be very unsustainable, because play to earn, the entire value proposition is that you're extracting value. You're playing a game to get something with monetary value that can be used in the physical world here today. And the way to get this monetary value in the physical world, through going to work or whatever, it's a lot harder to get than through games. So TLDR, for Web 3 games, it needs to be extremely complex, not just from the monetary and financial monetary economics aspect, but also what Miles said, the different social impact, the content economics, that's what we call it. The different layers of games, the different levels you have to achieve, the different ways of interacting with each other. They need to be as complex as the physical world to be able to bridge, to allow crypto to be the bridge between these two different worlds. So a lot of games right now are looking at creating, or even metaverses. We're going to replace the world. Yeah, we can replace the world, we can replace the physical world, but they need to be extremely complex as well. And that complexity is not just in UI, UX, in terms of game design, but also economy design.
I have a follow-up to that, but just also for all you guys to be aware, we're going to hopefully open it up to questions in a few minutes. So start thinking, anything you want to ask anyone, controversial, spicy, welcome, you know. Let's get it moving. But that's a very interesting point. And it sounds like everyone, including Miles, you know, who's building this stuff, you're all in agreement that, like, it won't work unless people want to stay. It won't work unless it's fun, unless it's immersive. That's where sustainability comes from, because the idea of it being about profit, that will be just as volatile, you know, as crypto is, and that could, when you're trying to create durable platforms, you know, that could destroy them. So, Miles, back to you, and it sounds like, from what you said earlier, you're in agreement with this. That, like, is that where your head's at? The priority is creating an ecosystem, creating something that is fun and participatory, and this whole difference between, you know, play to earn, and then I think Decentral games is more play and earn, right? So, like, where the roadmap, you know, the next year, 3 years, 5 years, how much is that defined by creating something that's, like, fun and sustainable in an ecosystem, as opposed to, like, profit first, and how is that adjusted, the roadmap for what you're building?
Yeah, definitely. So, you know, for us, like, we didn't try to reinvent the wheel. Like, we took a game that was already considered fun by a lot of people, poker, and kind of tried to add different token incentives. I think our main mistake was we just allowed for extraction, like Lisa was saying. You know, people were looking at APYs, they were looking at buying items in the game, and they're calculating the return based on, like, just dumping all the rewards. And that's a flawed, if your game allows people to do that, it's flawed, because people will do it. You kind of have to assume the worst there, especially when markets turn a little bit more bearish. And so we redesigned a few different pieces. I mean, I wouldn't say we're like super complex like a GTA 6, but I think the importance of adding kind of different layers and different assets within the game, some of them off-chain too, so they're not necessarily, like, able to dump them on the open market. and exit the ecosystem is really important. So we added a few different in-game kind of items that you can use to like either mint tokens or NFTs. And so I think that layer is really important. And then also, I feel like a lot of these gaming ecosystems were kind of built around this like guild model, and we saw this trend accelerate all throughout last year. Many guilds kind of all over the world popping up and just basically trying to extract value from the games. And so we kind of redesigned a delegation system. All of our in-game assets, you can if you own one, you can actually rent it out. So you can actually allow someone to use it, and then you get a revenue share. And this model is also flawed because the person who's borrowing the asset, they don't have any skin in the game. They're able to basically enter the ecosystem for free and then extract tokens and then be able to sell them to pay bills, as Kevin was saying, which is obviously flawed. And so we kind of reinvented this model where the person borrowing the asset kind of earns like off-chain assets that are then like usable to mint items later on in the game, and not necessarily be earning tokens every single day and just dumping them on the market. And so kind of overall, I think, when looking at this, and I think Lisa probably could talk a bit more on this, but I feel like you're basically creating a mini economy within this game. For us, we didn't try to make it too complex. We tried to add a bit more layers just so people wouldn't be able to extract. But at the end of the day, the game itself is trying to basically build this mini economy where people, economic agents, are kind of acting in their own self-interest. And the business model, instead of the business model is more built around kind of taxing that economic activity. And so that's kind of what we used in kind of deciding these new models for our game.
And so taking everything you're talking about, and I want to bring it back to something Kevin mentioned earlier, that we're in this very interesting moment in the development of the metaverse where there are essentially two competing models for how this could go. There's the Facebook Meta version, which is pretty centralized and gated, and where most digital assets are kind of dominated and controlled in a kind of Web 2 way by certain powerful centralized actors. And then, like Kevin mentioned, there's this potentially messier alternative, which is the open metaverse, where there's potentially a permissionless structure where digital assets can flow between platforms, where it's a constellation of many different open, ungated virtual worlds. And in terms, Lisa, back to you, just about what works and what doesn't. Between those two models, is one of them more conducive than the other to success in the ways that we've been talking about? That's my first question. And the second one, for anyone who would want to jump in that I'm just curious about, is with these two competing models, is it kind of a zero-sum game where only one will end up working and the other will fail? And how far away are we from that fork in the road? So, but Lisa, to start with you.
So just to confirm, we're talking about two different universes. One is a metaverse that's all internally transacting, and one is open, where it transacts across different metaverses.
Exactly,
right?
yeah.
Yes, great question. And I always like to use the analogy, all these different metaverses are like countries. And before you can start exporting any goods, I'm from Singapore, and before Singapore can start exporting any goods, you need to be sustainable so that your currency can be valued by other countries, and you can use your currency to exchange for US dollars to be trading with the US. So before we even start thinking about opening the entire metaverse, we need to be self-sustainable, self-regulating, self-financing to be able to facilitate these international transactions. So what does that really mean in the crypto space? You need to make sure that your games or your metaverse is sustainable. It actually is doing a lot of value accrual. Then you can do all these import-export to interact with other metaverse. So where are we, if that is the economics angle, where are we in the technological angle? In the tech angle, right now I think there was a conference about last month talking about the interoperability or international standards to allow for interoperability between metaverses. So we are in that direction. Once we can start building the interoperability on the tech perspective, we can start thinking about opening the economy from an international economics perspective. So we are getting there. I don't think it's one or the other. I think both can exist in the same realm. It's just like North Korea versus South Korea doing a lot of international expansion and international trade. North Korea just doing it on its own, doing whatever it's doing. So both can exist, and we need baby steps. We're not there yet.
I love that we're comparing Facebook to North Korea right now. This is highly appropriate. Look, I don't think it's a zero-sum game. Obviously, the market's going to find a path forward for both these business models to be sustainable. Facebook or Meta is extremely well funded. They're building out Horizon Worlds. They've got potentially limitless resources. And despite what we've seen of the avatars that they've released lately, I think there's a lot of room for improvement there, and I'm sure they'll do well. Well, Lisa mentioned interoperability, which is sort of like the holy grail that I think is, once that's achieved, that's what really enables this decentralized vision to scale, because once there's this common unified standard upon which anybody could build a metaverse where my NFTs can be ported over to like Miles's game or any other game, I think that's how that really leaps forward. In the interim, though, what I think is a really interesting model, I'm seeing more and more, or we're seeing more and more of what we like to call Web 2.5 games or metaverses. And I thought I invented this term, then I Googled it the other day, and like a dozen other people are using it, so I can't take credit. But these are like legacy platforms that have several million monthly active users. A great example is InView, if anybody here has ever heard of InView. And they have recently made the decision to replace their on-platform rewards program with a token. And what's great about that is you don't have to be crypto degen, or you don't even have to know how crypto works in order to use that. You can just go on their platform and buy the tokens, and you can benefit for the price appreciation if the value of the token goes up. I think what's great about that is they're not pure Web3, but they're not starting from zero users either. They've already got several million. And I think you're going to see platforms like that do very well over the next few years.
Gotcha. About to open it to questions. Everybody, get excited. But it's just interesting, one thought. Like, Lisa, your model of comparing the metaverse to, the world, the global economy is very interesting. And like to Kevin's point, it's, how do you play it out when, if, and I'm not saying it is, but if Facebook is North Korea in that model, take North Korea, but then give it the lion's share of resources globally, and what does that world look like? It's an interesting concept. But now, if anyone has any interesting, exciting, controversial, provocative questions, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, this might be for Lisa or Miles. So when you're modeling different economic designs, what's the sort of maximum ROI or the highest APY that you enable? So, and the reason I'm asking is that no matter how complicated you make the economy, someone would spend the time and research and identify the quickest way to get value and extract it. So when you're looking at that, is it a 2-3 year ROI that you think enables sustainability, which implies 25-30% APY, or is there a number that you have in mind when you're modeling your economic sort of incentives?
So I'll go first because I do more the general one, and then Miles, you can talk about your specific economy. I think, as all economists would say, it depends, and it genuinely depends a lot. I think the main important thing is when you talk about ROI, you're designing the system based on things that you can measure. Once we can measure things, we can change things. But the thing that we're measuring is not ROI to individuals. It's maximum gameplay. The whole economy that we're doing, any economy or metaverse or any games, is that it needs to be fun for people. We talk about stickiness again. It needs to be fun for people to stick. If people are there just for financial incentives, they're going to extract it and go somewhere else that gives them better returns. But if you have fun as your ROI, for example, then you're optimizing for that engagement and that stickiness with people. And when people are in your economy, you can do a lot of other economic models and other interesting incentives for people to affect their behaviors.
Yeah, I would say it really depends on the different assets in the ecosystem. I think we launched with the typical like NFT model where you buy an NFT and then you pretty much earn rewards endlessly into the future. And I think it's a really tough model because you're constantly being able to you're required to grow and mint new items all the time to be able to offset those rewards if you don't have any deflationary gameplay. And so we learned that the hard way. Obviously over time the token inflates. In our case, we didn't have a breeding model, which is I think a really a huge blessing because we saw a lot of these games that allowed breeding or kind of like the users to multiply the supply of the NFTs to just kind of cause this like cascading effect of just like inflation of the NFT assets, and then each one just emits an endless amount of tokens, and it's kind of just a downward spiral. For us, our supply was kind of capped for the NFTs, and so I think we were able to kind of recover a bit easier by adding kind of more deflationary gameplay modes. But in terms of just pure APY, I think you just really have to look at the expenditures from the the agents in the economy. And if people are spending a lot of money and kind of reinvesting their tokens that they're earning, I think you can actually be more generous for the rewards. I mean, I think those obviously should be eventually balanced. Once you reach a a state of the in-game economy where you're not necessarily growing anymore. I think you should be modeling kind of that balance. And so as more people spend money, I feel like you can raise rewards. As they don't, the reward should decrease.
And I think we have another question.
Yeah.
Oh.
This question is for Lisa, but Kevin and Miles, welcome to chime in. So, kind of, I like your point, kind of just saying that kind of a lot of these games needs to kind of have a kind of value accrual kind of happening. Otherwise, eventually, it's going to devolve into, and that value has to be compatible and transactable with the physical world. Otherwise, it's going to eventually devolve into a speculative thing. But then, like, what is that kind of value accrual? Kind of, what does that look like? So, kind of so far, I haven't heard anything.
Very good question. I think when people think about value accrual, people think about extrinsic value as in exchange value, price value. But there's a lot of intrinsic value that exists on platforms and ecosystems. Why are you in the US? Why is this conference in the US? Because there's a lot of intrinsic value of bright minds coming together to speak and talk about different things of changing the future. Why do people go to Facebook, or why do you use Instagram? Why do you use TikTok? Because there's a lot of intrinsic value within the system. And that is the key value that we're talking about. So what does this translate into? When we're talking about any metaverse or universes or GameFi, these different values are very specific to each ecosystem. So for example, with Shrapnel, a game, it's a first-person shooter game, and there is this very specific kind of value cycle loop where you go into certain areas, you battle out, you extract the guns from the competitor, and then you can keep the guns, and you can fuse two guns together to make better and stronger guns. So this is a very specific intrinsic value for the system of this game. Can we replicate this across all games? Absolutely. Every game and every economy has intrinsic value. But can we copy and paste it over? That is going to be very hard, because each economy, each ecosystem has its own market, its own economic agents, its own transactions that you want to incentivize. And you can't just take something that exists in first-person shooter and you put it in an MMORPG, or you put it in a card game. It just does not work like that. But you have value extraction or value creation in each of these economies. Because going back to economics, what is it? It's consumption, production, and distribution of resources, of goods. And these goods are just value generated in the system that we get to create.
Yeah, I'll answer this, and I hope that I don't sound trite, but at the end of the day, the game just has to be fun, and it has to keep people coming back. Look, I was just as excited as everybody else when Stepan came onto the mainstream a few months ago. I'm a huge fan of the idea of move to earn games, and I thought, wow, this is great. I can get paid for like walking around town. So I went through the process of getting a shoe, and the first day I walked around, I earned $80, and I thought, wow, this is amazing. I'm just going to keep doing this. And then the next day I logged in, and it showed me that, wow, I need to spend $85 to like regenerate my shoe, and it's just a Ponzi scheme. And that's why Stepan's failing. And unfortunately, I think a lot of these play-to-earn games are just they're reliant upon new users coming in to continue refueling the economics of that game. That is the definition of a Ponzi. So until you have users wanting to keep coming back and inserting value, rather than expecting to just take the money and run, we're going to have a hard time finding a successful play-to-earn game, which is why the big studios haven't bought in yet, but eventually it's going to happen.
Gentleman in the front, I think you had a question. This is for our final question.
Oh, thank you. So the point about arbitrage, either universe to real world or universe to universe, like kind of implied in that is that it's possible to trade. So using your country analogy, capital controls, or using a technical one, lack of interop. Like, you just can't do it even if there's an arbitrage. Does that factor into your thinking, and maybe even specifically Miles as well, like how you've designed it to kind of block people from extracting value as opposed to just designing for an equilibrium? Like, how do you think about that?
Yeah, definitely. So, the first kind of like design decision that we made, to kind of correct this value extraction was just giving people assets that were only usable in the game. So these actually were off-chain. Instead of giving them ICE, our reward token, we give them banked ICE. And so with that, it's like off-chain. They can save it up and mint items. So it keeps the value inside the ecosystem. But at the end of the day, if people have NFTs or tokens, they're going to be able to transfer them and sell them on exchanges. And so yeah, I think that definitely was factored in, to our design here. And so we're mainly just trying to get people to just reinvest as much as they can to just keep that value inside the ecosystem.
So I've got 2 points, very quick one, macro view and micro view. Macro view. The macro view, I'm super excited about this, and the ability to transfer assets between different universes is very exciting, because going back to the country analogy, this is exactly the best way to experiment with different kind of economic policies for countries, different kind of macroeconomic governance policies. And what does that mean? It means that every economy can design its own rules, regulations, and jurisdictions of how you govern interactions. If you want to be a communist country, if you want to be capitalist, go ahead. Do anything you want to do. You attract the right kind of people to stay in your system, go for it. Then you allow systems to trade between each other. Then the market gets to decide, the true market gets to decide whether this economy is sustainable or not. So in the long run, I think this is fantastic, because as an economist, you get to design the best social experiment where people come in and out of your ecosystem to play around with the economic model you've created. So that's the macro view. On the micro view, we design something that's self-sustaining first, that doesn't interact with other countries or other universes, and then we slowly open it up. So we make sure that it's isolated before we slowly open up once it's ready to be opened up.
That about does it on time, but Lisa, that is a very interesting point to end on, and I keep this thinking of the metaverse in a global model is very interesting, and I think that's an interesting thing to think about with even thinking geopolitically. Can competing or differing models of governance coexist? And I guess in the years to come, we'll see if that works in the metaverse. But thank you all for joining us. We give our panelists a round of applause. And we are done. So we will see you on this final beautiful day of Mainnet. Thanks, everybody.